A new season of the Champions Chess Tour 2024 has just begun. 4 big online chess events are taking place throughout the year, which has to determine which players are going to meet each other at the end of the year in the Tour finals. This week, the Chessable Masters is the first event of the year with some of the best players in the world are participating. Well, we are going to have a look at the game between HIKARU Nakamura, who doesn't need any introduction, and he's playing with the white pieces against Danish Lazavik, probably a name you have not heard before, but he was one of the big stars of last year's tour as he managed to qualify for the finals. He ended on the last place, but only 17 years old, a very strong online blitz player. Well, let's see how this game is going to end. HIKARU Nakamura with white against Danish Lazavik. The time control is 10 minutes plus 2 seconds increment. So very interesting stuff to look at. Well, make sure to subscribe to the channel and I will show you this game. HIKARU starts the game with the English opening. 1c4, knight f6, knight c3, e5. And there are a lot of different ways of playing here. Moves like knight f3 or g3 or e3. But HIKARU goes his own way. Plays here the move a3. Looks a little bit strange, but at the same time, you're always stopping the bishop from getting to b4 if that's going to be a problem at all. But let's see what happens. Black goes for the move d5, opening the center, aiming for very quick piece development. Pawn takes d5. Now knight takes d5. Knight f3, knight c6. And here we see another idea of the move a3 as white plays the move e4. Now we have some sort of Sicilian Sveshnikov with reversed colors, but white has already played the move a3, which means that the black knight cannot come to b4 with the idea to hop into the d3 square. So what should black do instead? Well, you don't really want to take on c3. After b takes c3, you do give white the possibility of occupying the center with an extra pawn later on. So instead, black went here for the move knight f4. So the knight is going into the other direction. Makes a lot of sense because the knight is on its way to d3 as the queen on d8 covers that d3 square as well. So how should white deal with that sort of positional threat? Because if the bishop on c1 will not be able to get into play, then also the rook on a1 is kind of stuck. Well, this has all been seen before, and the main theoretical continuation here is to play the move d4. So putting pressure against that pawn on e5, and at the same time you're attacking the knight on f4. Well, the line continues here with pawn takes d4. Now white can capture the knight on f4, but then also the knight on c3 can be taken. And after the exchange of queens, black does take back with the knight. You can take on c3. White is having somewhat more space, but an ugly pawn on c3, isolated pawn. And with the move knight e6, attacking the bishop on f4 and supporting the pawn on c7, black is absolutely okay. So HIKARU goes for a different idea, doesn't play the move d4, but instead he played here the move d3. So he is trying to challenge the knight on f4, but look what black is doing. Black just played here the move bishop g4, which is an excellent and very thematical move in these sort of structures. Because what black is trying to do here is gain control over the d4 square. He wants to jump in there with its knight. So the knight on f3 is not a good defender of that square. The knight on f3 is pinned. And if white would decide here to take on f4, giving up that dark squared bishop to destroy the pawn structure, well, things are still not very pleasant. Let's say after a move like bishop e2, black is going to play g6 with the idea to get the bishop to the long diagonal. Black is controlling the dark squares, will trade off the bishop for the knight at some point. I think this is a very pleasant position for black. So instead of taking on f4, HIKARU played here the move h3, attacking the bishop. Now black just captures, continues with the plan. Bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and now the knight comes in with tempo, hitting the queen and threatening to give a knight fork on c2, winning the rook in the corner. So white has no choice but just to go back with the queen to d1. And well, there are various ways to play here. Well, I think the move played by Lazavik does make a lot of sense. He just gets its bishop into the game. The bishop is fantastically placed on this diagonal, and white is still kind of solid but has a cramped position. There are no immediate tactics for black yet. Here you would expect the white bishop coming to e3 at some point, but HIKARU has a different plan. He first kicks the knight away with the move g3. The knight goes back to e6, so further reinforcing control over the d4 square. That is black's square in this game. And here still, a move like bishop e3 does make a lot of sense, but HIKARU sees that his bishop on f1 is not a good bishop. It's looking at its own pawns on d3, and also the pawn on e4 is fixed, so he played here the move h4. And his idea is to get the bishop to h3 and eventually trade that bishop for the knight. That's a very standard procedure in a Sicilian Kalashnikov or Sicilian Najdorf or the Sicilian Sveshnikov. This is all pretty standard. But now black starts playing very actively with the move queen f6, and the queen is doing great here with ideas even to give a check on f3 with the knight. The queen is also supporting that square, and here I think white underestimated the danger of his position. He just continued here with a move like bishop h3. What should white have done here? It's the move bishop e2, when the bishop is not looking great, but at least the white king can count on somewhat more support. Because after bishop h3, black had a stunning idea here with the move knight b3, sacrificing the knight, hitting the rook on a1, but opening the diagonal for the bishop and the queen. If you move the rook away, it's just checkmate instantly. That's not possible. If you decide to take the knight, well, then the queen will take on f2 anyway. Now the king is under check, needs to go to d1, and here we see why the bishop is so badly placed on h3. If now the bishop had been on e2, black doesn't have any tactics, but with the move queen f3, you're setting up a double attack, winning the rook in the corner. If you block it, then you even capture the rook with check, and on the next move you can take the bishop on h3 because it's check again. Just take it back one move. If white tries here to play the move king c2, then you should not take the rook on h1. There's bishop takes e6, and there are a lot of tactical ideas here. This is not good, but much simpler. Instead of taking the rook on h1, is just to give the knight fork on d4. With check, you're attacking the queen as well, so you're winning a lot of material as black here. So this all doesn't work, and well, there are a lot of problems here. Even if you try to stop the mating threat with bishop e3, you can just take on e3 and then take the rook. You're an exchange up. I mean, white can take on a1, but that's obviously not going to be sufficient compensation. Well, white doesn't want to resign on move 14. That's just absolutely insane. So white continued here the game with the move castling kingside, but now you're just a full rook down. White lost the rook on a1. It is looking for counterplay. You may try a move like bishop g5. This seems to be like a tricky idea. You're attacking the queen and you try to make it only an exchange as lacking material. But after knight takes g5, pawn takes g5, queen takes g5, there's no time to take the knight in the corner because of queen takes g3. The f-pawn is pinned and this is just absolutely hopeless. So instead of bishop g5, white went for the move knight to d5, attacking the queen. You got to be a little bit careful because after something like bishop takes e6, also the pawn on c7 is vulnerable. So black just plays it simple. Queen d8, that's a good move. And white has nothing to lose here anymore. His position is just busted. Queen h5 on the board. Threatening bishop takes e6 as the pawn on f7 is pinned. Now black just castled. And bishop f5. Threatening checkmate in one. And how to parry the threat? Well, if you play h6, that's a horrible mistake. It runs into bishop takes h6. And the king side is getting opened. If you take the bishop, well, it's queen takes h6 with mate to come. Rook e8, queen h7, king f8, queen h8, checkmate as the knight prevents the king from getting to e7. h6 is not good, but simple and strong is to play g6, attacking the queen, attacking the bishop. The queen got a move, it went back to g4 to pin the pawn on g6. And now there are various good moves. You may consider aggressive move like h5 to attack the queen. You can just drop back with your knight to g7 to unpin the pawn and threaten to take the bishop. Lazavik decided here just to get with its king out of the g file. King h8 now threatening to take the bishop. White decided to take. Pawn takes, attacking the knight. If you take on e6, well then just queen d6 or so is a good move to protect the pawn, to initiate the exchange of queens. And on the next move, the knight will just get back into the game. Black is just a full rook up. So instead, taking the pawn, white tried bishop g5, attacking the queen. Queen goes to d7. Now the pawn is pinned, so there's no threat to take here. At least not yet. But if you do take on a1, then the pawn on f2 is under threat. So the rook from f1 cannot easily move away. Knight f6, attacking the queen, but the queen goes to g7. Just a good move. Now, the f file is blocked, but if you do take the knight, well, very simple. It's rook takes f6, you're giving back some material. Now pieces come off the board, and black is just a bishop up with really good position, of course. So that's just winning for black. HIKARU tried here, queen takes e6, but look, now the knight cannot really come back to b3, but via c2 it will find its way back to d4. King g2 play, there's nothing white can really do here. Bishop d6, protecting the pawn. Knight to g4 played, threatening bishop h6, hoping to win back some material, but with knight d4, you're attacking the queen, queen goes back. You can even play h5 here, simple and strong, attacking the knight. If bishop h6, well then, once again, queen f7. You're solving the threat, you're trying to exchange queens, and you always will be material up as black still. So white went back with a knight to h2, but now you get the feeling that white's concept has just totally backfired already. Queen f7 on the board, black wants to exchange queens, queen c1, queen e6, bishop e3, c5. Now it's just a matter of technique. Let's see if a strong grandmaster is able to win the game with an extra rook. Bishop takes d4, c takes d4, with the idea that now the queen can come in to h6 with check, but after king g8, knight f3, okay, you gotta watch out a bit here. Knight g5, attacking the queen, threatening mate, and also the pawn on g6 is weak. You gotta think about it, but just keep it simple. When you're having so much extra material, the only thing you have to do is parry the threat. The bishop covers the g5 square, so when the knight comes there, you just whip it off the board. Knight d2, rook f7, knight f3, what else? Rook af8, attacking the knight on f3. The knight went back to g1, and now stunning shot. Bishop takes h4. Everything is winning, but this is a very stylish move, of course. You're taking another pawn. If you capture the bishop, it's queen g4 with check. And now if the king goes to h2, you take on f2 with check. Rook takes f2, check. King h1, queen g2 with checkmate. While if the king goes instead to h1, you take another pawn on h4 with check. And after king g2, the queen also hits the pawn on f2. Rook takes, it's checkmate. Therefore the bishop cannot be taken. f3 was played, now the bishop goes back, and well, you have won another nice pawn. Knight h3, rook h7, kicking the queen back, rook c8, now the c file is occupied, f4, and then, okay, white is opening up the position, so the rook just goes back to play on the side where white is just also much worse. King h2, h4, looking for ways to get rid of these pawns. g4 played, and now pawn takes f4. If you take with a piece, whichever piece you take on f4, there is bishop d6, and it's a pin, so you cannot take on f4. Rook f3 played, but you're not really keeping the position close. HIKARU could have resigned already long time ago, but the position is just absolutely hopeless, and black is just making moves, torturing his opponent, keep all the pawns protected, keep everything protected, and at some point you're just running out of moves. Now the rook comes over to to enter on the c2 square, for instance. King g7, queen f3, rook c8 now. Second rook is coming, renewing, reintroducing the threat of exchanging rooks. King h3, rook c2, rook f1, rook c1. You cannot avoid the exchange of rooks. The other rook comes in. And here, well, it was time. But HIKARU resigned this game. But, okay, the game itself was perhaps maybe not the most interesting one you have seen on the channel. But I appreciate you watched it. And the reason I covered it is because I thought the opening was quite instructive. You got to see how Black was trying to gain nice control over the d4 square and set up threats with the knight and the bishop and the queen. And of course, well, it was a big blunder by HIKARU, but still very instructive in my opinion. Let me know what you think of this game. And don't forget to subscribe. See you soon again.